So I used to be really invested in the original Xbox modding or soft mod homebrew scene way back in the day, like 2003, 2004. There was a lot of stuff going on at that time as it was still very new and fresh, and well, the system was still current, right? It was Microsoft's main platform, but people figured out how they could unlock the system and do a whole lot more with it, despite Microsoft's best efforts to shut it all down. However, since then, I have played around with Xboxes here and there when it came to some of the emulation stuff that was doable with it. However, recently a new product has come out that I mentioned I wanted to go back and look at because I have their HDMI board installed in the system, and Project Stellar had advertised not only to work with that HDMI board, but to also introduce a bunch of interesting features alongside of that, as it is a mod chip with sort of its own BIOS, and I wanted to go over that here today with my experiences installing it, and to be honest, just a look at how far the homebrew scene has come for that original Xbox. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new, and we're going to start with this video sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by Naraka Bladepoint. Now hitting over 20 million players, Naraka is celebrating its second anniversary, and starting July 14th will be free to play. Naraka has spearheaded development of melee weapons and hero skills into the battle royale genre, giving the player incredible amounts of combat possibilities while leveraging a wide set of weapons, various fighting styles, and powerful combos. Taking advantage of the game's counter system is key, allowing you to predict the enemy's next moves, lining up actions to counter, and make them pay. Naraka Bladepoint is available on PS5 starting July 14th, alongside Steam, Epic, Xbox Series XS, and Xbox One. There are also many free skins, chests, and more to claim when you log in. Click the link in the description right now to try out Naraka Bladepoint on Steam, Epic, Xbox, and PS5 for free. Celebrate Naraka's second anniversary and don't miss a chance to get launch rewards for PlayStation players. Thanks again to Naraka Bladepoint for sponsoring today's video. So first thing, let's talk about the chip itself. This is Project Stellar, and they have a ton of features that they're advertising alongside of this. Things like having the ability to upgrade your RAM, that's been done and is currently something you can take advantage of now with other chips. But really, looking up and down the board for this, I think the idea of using different controllers was kind of neat. And that's something I thought would be a lot of fun to be able to use an Xbox 360 or an Xbox One controller on it, but also being able to work hand in hand with that HDMI board that they sell as well. In fact, they link directly together, was compelling. The idea of creating this ultimate Xbox system and even being able to utilize the CPU upgrade that is legendary at this point if you can pull it off, seemed like I was buying into something that would be more future-proof, as it can also update itself when connected to the internet. Also, the install itself was pretty easy. So if we take a look inside of the package, you do have Project Stellar itself, as well as some pin headers and one board, as well as a connector depending on the type of motherboard or motherboard revision that your Xbox has. Mine is not a 1.6 and it's not a 1.0. That's all I really need to know, to be honest, to install something like this. Of course, you will need T20 Torx drivers in order to take the screws out of the bottom of the Xbox. I believe T10 the rest of the way. That's something you can get on Amazon. I talk about getting a bit set all the time. It's worth it. You're going to be using Torx drivers more and more as you go along from what we've even seen from the newer systems. Taking the system apart to get to where Stellar would go took longer than actually installing Stellar. Now, I already had pin headers installed because I had played around with this particular Xbox before with a different mod chip, but still, installing the pin headers isn't too bad. You just have to clean out some of the solder. You can use that. You can do that through using solder braid or some sort of desolder tool, whether it's one of the ones with a little bulb on it, the suction cup that you put on there, or if you have a legitimate desolder gun. On the bottom of the Xbox board, I have to connect 2 points, which they do provide a ribbon cable for to make it a bit easier, and then you have to install the pin headers, at which point Project Stellar just plugs into those pin headers, and that's kind of it. I did have to do some slight modification to that HD Plus board that I installed previously because it came out before Project Stellar. Recent HD Plus boards that they're selling seem to already have this bracket installed that would connect to Stellar, but I had to install that myself with a couple of solder points, and then I'm able to plug the cable in, connecting it. But if everything's installed correctly and you power the device on, Stellar will light up, as it does have a kind of a small rectangular OLED display, and it's pretty cool. It has a fun little animation that goes by, and it will provide you any error codes very, very clear right in front of you on that screen. Some may look at that and say, is it necessary? And as someone who has had to troubleshoot electronics for decades now, yes, it is very appreciated to have a clear display for error codes on post. But when I was able to confirm that the Xbox was posting alongside of Stellar without any issues into its custom BIOS, it was time for the fun to start. And that means upgrading the Xbox a bit further. So to start, I decided I was going to move the RAM up to 128 megabytes from that 64 megabyte amount that it comes with stock out of the factory. And this is a bit easier than it sounds. All right, so we're not slotting in RAM like we do with a PC. That's extremely easy to do. There is soldering involved. However, you don't have to remove chips in order to add RAM, because the spots where the RAM go are just completely unpopulated on basically all of the different Xbox boards. I believe the 1.6 motherboard revision is a bit harder, a bit more challenging, but for most Xbox systems, you can go on eBay, you can buy RAM for it, and then you have to solder down all of the legs, which once again sounds difficult, but I think for most people with any kind of soldering ability, this won't be too bad. The legs are spaced a bit further apart than other applications I've had to do, specifically very small, fine T-SOP solder jobs. But the solder itself did not bridge easily between the pins when I was installing it. And after putting down all 4 chips, 2 on the top of the board, 2 on the bottom, it posted no problem. From there, I did turn my attention to the storage inside of the system, as most people do after they modify their Xbox. Usually they want to upgrade their storage, since the Xbox come with either an 8 or a 10 gigabyte drive. Not really going to cut it now. Back then, that was an overwhelming amount. I mean, if you didn't really put any CDs, rip those to the drive, you probably always saw 50,000 blocks for your save data. But in this case, I want to be able to rip my Xbox games to the drive and just store them locally for quick access and faster load times. Which means we're going to an SSD. And I know you might be looking at me like, why? That seems like overkill for the Xbox. It was running off of a slow IDE drive. And you'd be right. Really, you can go up to a more current SATA drive, like a 7200 RPM, 2 terabyte or something there, and it would probably be fine. In fact, the speed differences would be negligible. But come on, it's funny. You're putting an SSD inside of a 20-year-old Xbox. Why not? Also, an SSD will draw less power, it will put off less heat, and it won't make any noise. So that's another benefit, as I did want to make this system quiet, which we'll get to that part in a bit as well. But because I am going to an SSD, there were a few things I needed to do. One, I need to get the IDE connector to the SATA connector. In that case, there are adapters you can buy online that are very touch and go. I went with the Star Tech adapter that was recommended, found it on Amazon, plugged it in, worked fine. It did see the hard drive and didn't have any issues formatting it. Now, in order to get that connection to the board, you do have to upgrade the 40-wire IDE cable to an 80-wire. This is because Project Stellar will actually run up to UDMA 5 for data transfer, and you will have issues or just it not working at all if you stick with the 40 wire that's currently installed in the Xbox from the factory. I did have to fold up the IDE cable a bit. I think it was like a 22 or 24 inch one, so it had to figure out a nice little path for it there so it would fit into the system. But for the most part, it worked fine. Didn't have any issues after kind of tucking it underneath of the disk drive, and then everything went together fine. Okay, so we're almost done. I wanted to do one other thing though, and that is quiet the system down from the part that is making the most noise, and that's the fan. During this generation, fans were loud in these systems. They were. The PS2, the GameCube, the Xbox, you definitely knew they were on, we'll say. And I've done upgrades for fans in the GameCube and the PS2 to make them quieter, and I think it was well worth the $20 or $30 to do so. Most of these fans have to come with a bracket surrounding it so it will clip into place, because very few of these just had straightforward, oh, you just screw it into the back or a fan slot or something and you're good to go. In this case, for the Xbox, it was pretty easy. They had like a 3D printed mount for the fan. It kind of clipped into the back after sitting in. Plugged it in then, and it fired up no problem. And I will say the sound difference is incredibly noticeable. Here's a comparison. I also did install a bracket for the SSD. I probably could have just left it in there and it wouldn't have had any issues, but I just wanted to screw it down just to make sure everything was secured inside of the Xbox, and basically just getting any standard 3.5-inch bay to 2.5-inch adapter for an SSD should work. Okay, so with all of that done, the Xbox is back together. Let's try it out. So I just powered the Xbox on, and we should see it power up with nice 720p display for that boot up animation, which you can make like 480p. I think it looks cool. I think the frame rate might be a little lower on it when it's starting up because it is 720p, but it looks very clean, and I think it's a great way to kind of greet you after all the hard work you put into this thing, that yes, you do have at least an upgrade when it comes to the visual appearance on your screen. So this is the Stellar OS beta as it's shown at the top. Let's talk immediately about what we see as you turn it on. We have the CPU frequency, 733 megahertz, got our CPU temperature, motherboard temperature, system RAM. You'll notice 136 megabytes. Now, to my understanding, Stellar does have 8 megabytes that is detected, and it kind of gets mashed together with the system RAM. So that's supposed to be 128. If you have a stock board, I think it's in like the 70s is what it'll show or something. But yeah, unfortunately, you can't use the 8 megabytes for anything currently. So 128 megabytes is at least found in the Stellar OS. And again, we're going to talk about that in a second here. With this chip, though, the system can now set the date and time automatically if you have it plugged into the network. So if you remove that clock capacitor, it won't really matter too much as long as you always have it plugged in through Ethernet. So that is at least a nice thing to have there. Otherwise, though, they do have all kinds of enhancements and different things you can do. You can play around with the Xbox HD Plus from this menu if you have it. Of course, it being plugged directly into it, able to communicate. These are all of the different enhancements you can have with the native 720p rendering of the boot animation. You can play around with the UDMA speed if you'd like. I've left it on auto this whole time. Haven't had an issue. They do also talk quite a bit about the enhanced game compatibility, still in the experimental stages as they outline here, but that's for CPU upgraded consoles. I've considered doing one of these for a little while now, as in making the ultimate Xbox system. I would like to use Stellar OS to do that because it seems like they're really pushing to support these upgraded consoles for the CPU. And if that's the case, I might come out of retirement with the BGA soldering and chip lifting and all kinds of stuff, put together another setup just to do that. So if that's something you like to see, as soon as I find out that Stellar is, we'll say, out of beta, and they have a lot of the stuff they've promised ready to roll, maybe we'll do that. We'll make the ultimate Xbox. I don't know, it's 16 terabyte. We'll drop in the Pentium 3 or Celeron or whatever people are using now in this thing, and you go to 256 megabytes of RAM. This is the thing I really like, the tools section for the hard drive. You can see the 1 terabyte drive there, the SSD. And in order to install this, you can just drop your hard drive in. You don't have to pre-format it on a PC or anything. Stellar will actually format it for you, which is really, really cool. Now, you will still have to FTP over the dashboard that you want to use. And by the way, there's an E-partition. Make sure there's a folder named dashboard, and that's where you drag and drop your dashboard, because I was getting kind of thrown through a loop there. because I didn't have dashboard folder named correctly. I just had dropped the dashboard in the E drive, and it would actually boot loop and then tell me that there was no hard drive found. I was like changing adapters, ID cables, the whole thing. Turns out that's all it was. So if you set something like this up with Stellar, E drive, dashboard folder, then you drop your files in there. I also like that they seem to have Insignia in mind for this the Stellar OS project. Insignia is the big revival of Xbox Live as we knew it back then, and you can use it with all kinds of games that they continue to add support for. MVG has told me all about it. I've wanted to try it out, and I think I will at some point. Maybe get online with some of the people from the Spawncast, and we try to run through a couple of games that they have supported just to try it out and see how it's going. They also have this part here in the input devices, and it's an additional input driver, right? It's grayed out. I've tried using a USB to Xbox adapter, and I haven't really been able to get much out of it. I don't know if that was enabled at one point and they disabled it or something. That's what people are mentioning on different forums right now as I was trying to do some research on this one specifically. I think it'd be really cool if we got to a position where you could use controllers using Stellar OS for the Xbox One or the Xbox 360. And I would like us to get to a point where you could sync it up through Bluetooth, maybe through way of another board that's installed. The fact that we have gotten to that point with the GameCube, I'd like to think that there's a future for the Xbox the same way. Anyway, that is just a quick tour for Stellar OS. I do want to mention before we quick boot into XBMC4 Gamers, which is a custom dashboard that I really like, the system RAM. It's supposed to be 128 megabytes that I've installed. However, I've noticed that outside of Stellar, nothing else seems to be able to find the additional RAM that I have added to the board, and that appears to be the same way for everyone right now. And I feel like that's something that they need to address sooner rather than later, considering they advertise support for 128 and 256 megabytes. Technically, yes, Stellar OS does support that, as you can see, but it's really useless at this point because running homebrew that requires 128 megabytes is currently impossible using Stellar OS, but using other mod chips, it's completely workable. With that out of the way, though, we can quick boot directly into XBMC4 Gamers without having to power off the system and then power it back on. And I had mentioned that the overall homebrew community behind the Xbox has really impressed me, especially now. You figure the Xbox, because it is legacy, and we've had systems that are more capable to modify even in kind of the same family with the Xbox 360. No, people continue to plug along with the original Xbox, and I like that quite a bit. So this one, for example, has profiles you can set up, and I even put the little Spawnwave Media image there, and it's a very clean-looking interface that you can change up the skins and all this, but it's incredibly capable. So I have applications, demos, emulators, games, and homebrew. And in Homebrew, for example, you can see I had Half-Life 128 megabytes. Guess what doesn't work despite me having 128 megabytes of RAM installed? Yeah, that's, again, Stellar OS. That's something I would like to see them get solved right away. So we have options. I want to go to Settings, and I want to go to Downloader, because this is something I think is awesome, especially when you first get it set up, as there's like an entire like Homebrew storefront almost that you go on, and you can just download whatever you need. There's artwork for all the different games that you get, which they now have an artwork installer here. They have dashboards. You can jump around if you want to use one that I remember fondly from way back in the day, Unleash X, or you can use XBMC Emu Station if you just want to make an emulator box for the most part. And they also have downloadable content for all the different games. So let's say you wanted to get I think they had AMP 2, I feel like they had 3 new runs, Sky Pioneer Slopestyle. I remember with NFL 2K5, here it is, they had roster updates that you can grab, and I believe WWE, let me see, where is that? WrestleMania 21, there was an issue with the game that certain ones they shipped out that had a bug to where the game would just crash constantly. It was a mess, and we actually have the title update here ready to go. See, a lot of people probably don't even realize that we had downloadable content with the original Xbox during that generation, or even title updates. And it's great to see it preserved and accessible here, because otherwise the servers that would be holding it, well, they wouldn't really be up and available now. You do have a range of emulators. I had loaded up the PlayStation 1 emulator just because it's funny that the original Xbox plays PS1 games. It was okay. It depends on the game you're picking. I think Crash struggling a little more. Mega Man X4 seemed to do better, so it's gonna vary depending on which games you want to play. Game Boy Advance, Game Boy, they're actually arcade emulators, Neo Geo CD, so there's some pretty cool stuff you can pick. But I think Homebrew is pretty cool too. Like Half-Life, I would have liked to have seen that working with the RAM upgrade that I did. But you can scroll through here. Here's Panzer Dragoon, Quake X, they have Doom X, Wolfenstein 3D, Tomb Raider with Open LoRa, which is getting ported all over the place. It was even on the Game Boy Advance. So there are some pretty cool custom projects you can download and experience, even apparently some Zelda variations for Link to the Past. You also have an entire mod section that has Metal Wolf Chaos, English translation, The Punisher, uncensored, and Dead or Alive 3 unofficial skins. A set of 125 or so skins, including nudes, so don't install this if your kids play DOA 3. Wow, things really haven't changed in 20 years, have they? However, I did mention that one of the big reasons I was going to modify this Xbox and set it up is because I wanted to be able to rip a bunch of my original Xbox games to the system for really just ease of access and loading off of the SSD. I'm sure load time should be a bit quicker there. And actually doing it is very, very easy now. See, there is a program, DVD to Xbox, and it's that simple. You have the game inside of the disk drive, you hit a few buttons, it'll create the folder, and then it will rip the game to that folder in the hard drive. And because I set this up with a 1 terabyte, I did leave a pretty large F partition designed to hold a bunch of these games. And for the most part, it's not ripping the entirety of the disk, so you're not ending with like a 5 or 4.5 gigabyte file. You end up with something between 1.5 and 2.5 gigabytes, which is completely manageable at that point, and it only takes like 4 or 5 minutes maybe per disc to rip. And check this out, when it's all done and you go to games, you can also set it up with cover art, and it has like the nice background. You can scroll through all the different games, and I just started loading titles that I have here onto the hard drive because it was so easy to do. They even have these synopsis where you can press Y, and what it'll do is come up with an entire menu that gives you like a nice little summary of the game, tell you the title ID. You can go down to more information and get apparently a rating, the ESRB descriptor, how many players. Also, it will tell you, there's little screenshots there too. It'll also tell you, which I thought was extremely useful. If I go to, let me see, True Crime, if that has it up here, it will tell you the video display modes, which I thought was very important. So this is, for example, 720p. So if you load it up, you have it installed to the drive, you can check to see what can take advantage of that HD Plus that you have installed. And I know there's backwards compatibility with Xbox Series or being able to emulate the games, but something about just being able to play them on your original hardware, even using an SSD, is, I mean, it's fun. And some games like Jet Set Radio Future, they just don't seem like, it just doesn't seem like we're going to have them come back. A lot of it having to do with licensing. In general, this generation, there was a lot of licensed music getting thrown around, but you just hit A to pick one of these games, and it loads up fairly quickly. We'll go through a screen where it has to basically handshake again to get the right resolution set up, and there we go. We're in. So I played a little bit of Jet Set Radio Future, and a lot of memories for this one. But what's really cool about this, it still holds up pretty well. And I think a lot of that has to do with the art style that they went with for Jet Set Radio, because if you play other games that tried to be more realistic and not like Jet Set Radio, where they went with a more cel-shaded look, it doesn't look great anymore compared to what we have. But this, man, it still just looks really, really good. And this is the point where Sega was, they just came off the Dreamcast. It didn't work out for them, unfortunately. They left the console market, but being able to leverage the GameCube and the Xbox specifically, because it was like the new kid on the block, but also the really powerful kid on the block. I think Sega was able to deliver some awesome experience. This and Panzer Dragoon were definitely some standouts, but This game still, I mean, really, still holds up. So I would love to see Sega do something with it, or Microsoft through backwards compatibility, but unfortunately they've expressed issues that they've had with it. So I'm not really holding my breath expecting them to bring this back in any capacity. But if you're all done playing, you want to jump back to the dashboard, you click left and right stick in, and then you hit left and right trigger, and it will soft reboot the system and get us back to XBMC4 Gamers. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Project Stellar and the original Xbox. I do think the homebrew scene for the Xbox is very, very impressive. I mean, it's incredible stuff that they've been able to do there with a system from, 2001 now? But for Project Stellar, I do think it's still a project, as in they still have a lot of work to do and promises to fulfill. Now, the potential is there, but at this time, as of this recording, it is harder to recommend it outright for that $100 price tag, and if you want the HD Plus to come with it, it's $160. Now, for the HD Plus, I do think it's a good picture you get out of the Xbox, and some games will provide a picture at 720p and do look really good through that output. And the idea of it being compatible with Project Stellar from that hardware level is compelling. But the fact that the RAM that I have installed is still not accessible by the custom dashboard and homebrew that I've installed is kind of an issue, or being able to use different input devices like an Xbox One or Xbox Series controller, as they had previously mentioned. So there's still some stuff I'd like to see from them in order to get this thing to version 1.0, but the potential's there. And if they continue down the path of the updates that they've put out previously, enabling and adding certain things like that, yeah, I think this could be a really, really cool mod chip to pick up, install on your Xbox, and take advantage of all kinds of breakthroughs that have been made over the last couple of decades for this original Xbox system. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.